Welcome back to HOA Control Freaks. The fence was not the problem. The HOA was. I am escalating this today, do you understand? Christine yelled, jabbing her finger at the retaining edge where my fence post sat in fresh concrete. She said it touched the edge, and that was encroachment, and I had about 5 seconds to process the fact that my Sunday morning coffee was about to turn into a battlefield. I live in Colorado Springs, and the Harborview Terrace Association has a reputation for turning missing survey stakes into neighborhood scandals. I run a mobile detailing business, and I depend on driveway access to load my equipment every morning. Last year was brutal financially, a divorce and a business slump that left me counting every dollar, and I moved here 3 months ago because the rent was reasonable and the neighborhood looked quiet. That was my first mistake. Christine Kelly is the Welcome Committee Chair, which in Harborview Terrace means she weaponizes move-in rules like a hobby. She showed up at my door the day I unloaded my truck, handed me a 3-ring binder with a folded policy sheet tucked inside, and said, "You should have read the rules before you moved in, sweetheart." I thought it was a weird welcome, but I smiled and thanked her. 2 weeks later, she cited me for parking my work van on the street overnight, even though the rule only applied to commercial vehicles over 10,000 pounds. I pointed that out, and she said, "I decide what counts as compliant, not you." That was the first time I heard her catchphrase, and it would not be the last. The fence situation started because my backyard had no barrier between my patio and the slope that drops toward the retention pond. My dog kept wandering, and I needed a simple privacy fence to keep him safe and give me a place to store my detailing gear out of sight. I got a permit from the county, hired a contractor named Miguel who had good reviews, and we started work on a Saturday. By Sunday morning, we had set the first post, a corner piece anchored in a 2-foot hole with quick-dry concrete. I was standing there admiring the clean line when Christine appeared at the property edge, holding a stack of printed photos with no readable text and yelling that I was violating setback standards. She said the post was 6 inches over the line, which would mean I was encroaching on HOA common property. I told her I had the survey and the post was exactly where the county permit said it should be. She shoved the folded policy sheet in my face and said the HOA rules required a setback of 3 feet from any retaining edge, and the concrete footing touched the edge. I looked at the edge. It was a decorative border made of landscaping stones, not a retaining wall, and my survey clearly marked it as inside my lot line. I said that, and she cut me off. "I am escalating this today, do you understand?" She said it again, louder, and I realized she was not here to discuss anything. She was here to win. Miguel arrived 20 minutes later with his tools, and Christine was still standing there, now on her phone. She saw him and immediately walked over, blocking his path. She told him he was working without HOA approval, and if he continued, she would report him to the county and the state contractor board. Miguel looked at me, confused. I showed him the permit and said we were fine. Christine said the permit did not override HOA rules, and she had the authority to issue a stop work order. Miguel asked to see the order in writing. She did not have one. She said she would email it within the hour, and if he did any more work before she sent it, the HOA would fine me $500 per day and hold him personally liable for the removal costs. Miguel is a good guy, but he is also running a business. He told me he had another job starting tomorrow, and if today collapsed, he would lose his spot on the schedule. That was my time pressure. I could not afford to lose Miguel, and I could not afford $500 a day in fines that might or might not be legal. I told Christine I wanted to see the exact rule she was citing, in writing, with the section number. She pulled out her phone, scrolled for a second, and read aloud from what she claimed was the covenant. It said all fences required board pre-approval and a 3-foot setback from common property edges. I said my survey showed no common property on my lot, and the county had already approved the design. She said the survey was outdated, and the HOA had redrawn the property lines last year during a drainage project. That was news to me, and it sounded like nonsense. I asked when the redrawing happened and who approved it. She said it was handled by the HOA management company, and if I had attended the meetings, I would know. I had not attended any meetings because I had only lived here 3 months, and I was working 60-hour weeks trying to rebuild my detailing business. I told her I would contact the management company and get clarification, and until then I was proceeding with a county-approved permit. She said that was my choice, but I would regret it. Then she took a photo of the fence post with her phone, turned, and walked away. Miguel and I stood there for a minute, and he said, "Man, I have dealt with HOA people before, but she is intense." I agreed. An hour later, I got an email. It was from Christine, CCing the HOA management company and the board president. The subject line said, "Violation notice, immediate action required." The body of the email said I had installed a fence post without HOA approval, in violation of Section 4.7 of the covenants, and I was being fined $250 for the first day, with an additional $250 per day until the post was removed and the hole restored. The email included a deadline. I had until 5 p.m. today to remove the post, or the fine would start accumulating tomorrow morning. It also said that if I refused to comply, the HOA would contract a removal service and bill me for the cost, plus a 25% administrative fee. I read it twice. The numbers did not make sense. The email said $250 per day, but Christine had told Miguel $500. The section number was different too. She had said 4.7, but when I pulled up the covenants on the HOA website, Section 4.7 was about holiday decorations. Fences were covered in Section 6.3, and that section said fences required architectural review. But it did not mention setbacks or immediate removal. The 3-foot rule she kept quoting did not appear anywhere in the document I was reading. I called my friend Aaron, who is a CPA and has dealt with HOA audits before. I explained the situation, and he said it sounded like Christine was either misquoting the rules on purpose or working from an outdated version. He told me to request a copy of the exact covenant version she was citing, with the amendment date, and to ask the management company to confirm the fine schedule in writing. He also said to document everything, because if the HOA was making up rules, that could be grounds for a legal challenge or even a management company review. I thanked him and sent a reply-all email asking for clarification on the section number, the fine amount, and the survey data Christine mentioned. I kept the tone polite, but firm. Christine replied within 10 minutes. She did not answer any of my questions. She said, "You should have read the rules before you moved in, sweetheart, and if I continued to argue, I would be cited for harassment and banned from HOA meetings." I stared at the screen. The line about reading the rules was exactly what she had said the day I moved in, and now she was using it as a weapon. I decided to let it sit for a minute and focus on the fence. Miguel was still on site, finishing the post anchoring, and I wanted to make sure we stayed on schedule. I went outside and told him to keep going. He hesitated, and I said I would handle Christine. He nodded, but I could see he was nervous. By noon we had 3 posts set, all on my side of the property line according to the survey. Christine came back around 1 p.m., this time with a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a polo with a logo that said Precision Property Services, and he was carrying a clipboard with no readable text. Christine introduced him as the HOA vendor for landscaping and code enforcement. She said he was here to document the violation and provide a removal estimate. I asked to see his credentials, and he handed me a business card. The card listed him as a site manager, but it did not say anything about code enforcement authority. I told him I had a county permit and a survey, and I was happy to show him both. He looked at Christine, and she said the survey was invalid because the HOA had updated the lot lines. I asked her to show me the updated survey, and she said it was on file with the management company. The vendor guy walked the property line, measuring with a tape measure and taking photos. Christine stood next to him the whole time, pointing at the posts and talking in a low voice. When they finished, he came back and said the posts were installed within the setback zone, and per HOA policy they would need to be removed. He handed me a printed estimate for removal, $1,200, plus the 25% admin fee Christine had mentioned. I asked who authorized him to give estimates on my property without my request. He said the HOA board had a standing contract with his company for enforcement actions. I said that was interesting, because I had not seen any board vote or authorization letter. He said that was between me and the HOA, and if I did not arrange removal by the deadline, his crew would be back tomorrow morning to do it for me. I was done being polite. I told him he was not setting foot on my property without a court order, and if he showed up tomorrow, I would call the police for trespassing. Christine stepped forward and said I was threatening a contracted vendor, and she would be adding that to my violation file. I said she could add whatever she wanted, but I was not paying for a removal I did not authorize, and I was not pulling a legally permitted fence because she misquoted a rule. She smiled, the kind of smile that made my skin crawl, and said, "I decide what counts as compliant, not you." Then she turned and walked away with the vendor guy, and Miguel said, "Dude, you need a lawyer." He was probably right, but I could not afford a lawyer on top of everything else. I was rebuilding my finances after a bad year, and I could not absorb bogus fees or legal bills. I needed to handle this myself, and I needed to do it fast. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. I took photos of the fence posts, the survey markers, and the property line. I measured the distance from the posts to the landscaping stones and confirmed it was inside my lot. I downloaded the county permit and the covenant document from the HOA website and saved them with timestamps. Then I sent another email to the management company, this time with all the documentation attached, asking them to review Christine's fine notice and confirm whether the removal estimate was legitimate. By evening, I had not heard back from the management company, but I got another email from Christine. This one had a PDF attachment labeled Final Warning. The document was a formal violation notice with altered dates. It said the original citation was issued 2 weeks ago, and I had ignored multiple follow-up emails and a certified letter. None of that was true. The first email I got from her was this morning, and I had never received a certified letter. The notice also included photos, and when I looked closely, I realized they were recycled. One of the photos showed my fence post, but the timestamp in the corner was from last month, before I even started the project. Another photo showed a different property entirely, a chain-link fence that did not match my design. I forwarded the email to Aaron and said, "She is making things up." He called me 10 minutes later and said, "This is fraud. If she is fabricating dates and using fake photos, you need to escalate this to the management company and the board, and you need to do it in writing with evidence. If they do not shut her down, you might have grounds for a lawsuit." I asked what kind of lawsuit, and he said harassment, defamation, maybe even tortious interference if her threats scared off my contractor. I told him Miguel was still on board for now, but barely. Aaron said to keep him in the loop, and to start building a timeline of every interaction with Christine, every email, every threat, every inconsistency. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the deadline, the fines, the removal threat, and Christine's smug smile. I decided to go outside and check on the fence posts. It was around 11 p.m. and the neighborhood was quiet. I walked into the backyard with a flashlight, and that is when I saw her. Christine was standing at the property line with her own flashlight, inspecting the posts. I froze. She did not see me at first, and I watched as she walked along the fence, taking more photos with her phone. Then she bent down near one of the survey stakes and did something I could not quite see. When she stood up, the stake was gone. I turned on my phone camera and started recording. Christine moved to the second stake and pulled it out of the ground. She put both stakes in a small bag, then walked back toward the common area. I stepped out of the shadow and said, "What are you doing?" She spun around, and for a second she looked genuinely startled. Then she recovered and said she was conducting a site inspection, which was within her authority as Welcome Committee Chair. I said site inspections do not include removing survey markers, and what she just did was illegal. She said the stakes were placed incorrectly and she was correcting the error. I held up my phone and said, "I have video of you removing them, and I am going to send it to the county and the management company." Her face went hard, and she said, "You were trespassing on HOA common property." I said I was standing on my own lot, and she was the one trespassing. Then I turned and went back inside, my hands shaking. The next morning I called the county surveyor's office and reported the missing stakes. They said tampering with survey markers was a misdemeanor in Colorado, and I should file a police report. I called the non-emergency line, and an officer came out around 10 a.m. I showed him the video, and he took a statement. He said he would follow up with Christine, but unless I wanted to press charges, it would probably just be a warning. I said I wanted it on record, and he nodded. Then he asked if I had any other evidence of harassment, and I showed him the email thread, the fake photos, and the altered dates. He said it looked like a civil dispute, but the video of her removing the stakes was clear evidence of property interference. He wrote up a report and gave me a case number. Christine must have found out about the police visit, because by noon I had another email. This one was from the board president, a guy named Tom who I had never met. He said the board had received a complaint from Christine about my hostile behavior, and they were scheduling a hearing to review my fence violation and determine next steps. The hearing was set for Thursday night, 2 days away, and I was required to attend. If I did not show, the board would proceed with the removal order and the fines, and I would forfeit my right to appeal. The tone was formal and cold, and I realized Christine had escalated this to the full board. I called Aaron and told him about the hearing. He said I needed to treat it like a legal proceeding, bring all my evidence, and be ready to present a clear timeline. He also said I should bring a witness, someone who could back up my version of events. I thought about Miguel, but he was not a resident, and I did not want to drag him deeper into this. Then I remembered my neighbor, a quiet guy named Paul who lived 2 doors down. Paul had stopped by last week when he saw Miguel working, and he mentioned that Christine had hit him with a similar violation notice last year over his mailbox placement. He said he ended up paying the fine because he did not have the energy to fight it, but he always felt like she had targeted him for no reason. I knocked on Paul's door that evening and explained what was happening. He listened, and then he said, "She did the same thing to me. She claimed my mailbox was 2 inches over the property line, but I had it installed by the Postal Service and they confirmed it was in the right spot. She would not drop it, and I ended up paying $300 just to make her go away. I asked if he would be willing to come to the hearing and tell the board what happened. He hesitated, then said, "Yeah, I will do it. Someone needs to call her out." The hearing was held in the HOA clubhouse, a small building near the entrance of the neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early with Aaron, Paul, and a folder full of documents. Christine was already there, sitting at a table with Tom, the board president, and 2 other board members I did not recognize. She was wearing her pink windbreaker and the tiny body camera clipped to her jacket, and she had the folded policy sheet sitting in front of her like a prop. When I walked in, she glanced at me and then looked away. Her face blank. Tom called the meeting to order and said we were here to review the fence violation and my response. He asked Christine to present her case first. She stood up and launched into a prepared statement. She said I had installed a fence without HOA approval, ignored multiple warnings, threatened a contracted vendor, and tampered with HOA property by refusing to acknowledge the updated lot lines. She held up the stack of printed photos and said these were proof of the violation, taken over a 2-week period. I knew the photos were fake, and I was ready to prove it. When Christine finished, Tom asked if I wanted to respond. I stood up and said I had a county-approved permit, a professional survey, and no record of any warnings before Sunday morning. I pulled out the permit and the survey and handed copies to each board member. Then I showed them the email thread, highlighting the inconsistencies in Christine's dates and the fake photos. I pointed out that one of the photos was time-stamped a month before I started the project, and another showed a completely different property. Tom frowned and asked Christine to explain. She said the timestamps were a technical error, and the photos were meant to illustrate similar violations in the neighborhood. I said that was not what her email claimed, and if she was using fake evidence that was fraud. Christine's face went red, and she said I was twisting her words. Tom said he wanted to see the original emails, and I pulled them up on my phone and passed it to him. He read for a minute, then looked at Christine and said, "These dates do not match what you told us." She said the management company had the correct dates on file, and if there was a discrepancy, it was their error, not hers. Tom said he would follow up with the management company, but in the meantime, he wanted to hear from any other witnesses. I nodded to Paul, and he stood up. Paul introduced himself and said he lived 2 doors down. He told the board about his mailbox violation last year, how Christine had claimed it was over the line and threatened daily fines until he paid. He said he later confirmed with the Postal Service that the mailbox was in the correct spot, but by then he had already paid the fine and Christine refused to refund it. He said she does this to people. She picks a target, makes up a rule, and then threatens them until they pay. I do not know if it is personal or if she just likes the power, but it is not right. The room went silent. One of the board members, a woman named Lisa, said, "Is this true?" Christine said Paul was exaggerating, and the mailbox issue was resolved according to HOA policy. Paul said, "I paid $300 for a violation that did not exist. That is not resolved. That is theft." Tom held up a hand and said they would discuss the mailbox issue separately, but right now, they needed to focus on the fence. He asked if I had any other evidence. I pulled out my phone and played the video of Christine removing the survey stakes. The board members leaned forward, watching. The video was clear, Christine walking along the property line, bending down, pulling out the stakes, and putting them in a bag. When it finished, Tom looked at Christine and said, "Did you remove those stakes?" She said she was correcting an error, and the stakes were placed on HOA common property. I said the county surveyor confirmed the stakes were correct, and I had filed a police report for tampering. Tom asked if I had the case number, and I showed him the report. Lisa said, "This is serious, Christine. You cannot remove survey markers even if you think they are wrong." Christine said she was protecting HOA interests, and if the board did not support her, she would resign. Tom said no one was asking her to resign, but they needed to table the fence violation until the management company could provide a clear answer on the lot lines and the covenant sections Christine had cited. He said he would contact the management company tomorrow and request a full audit of the violation notices Christine had issued in the past year. Christine stood up and said, "I decide what counts as compliant, not you, and if the board was going to undermine her authority, she was done." Then she grabbed her folded policy sheet, stuffed it in her bag, and walked out. The room stayed silent for a few seconds, and then Lisa said, "Well, that was dramatic." Tom adjourned the meeting and said he would follow up with me by email. I thanked Paul and Aaron, and we left. Outside, Paul said, "I am glad I came. I have been wanting to say that for a year." I told him I appreciated it, and I meant it. Without his testimony, the board might have dismissed my evidence as a personal dispute. With it, Christine's pattern was undeniable. The next day I got an email from Tom. He said the management company had confirmed that the lot lines had never been redrawn, and the survey I provided was the current legal boundary. He also said Section 4.7 of the covenants, which Christine had cited, was indeed about holiday decorations. And the correct section for fences was 6.3. Section 6.3 required architectural review, but it did not mention setbacks or immediate removal, and it definitely did not authorize daily fines without a board vote. Tom said Christine had been issuing violation notices without board approval for at least 6 months, and several residents had paid fines that were never authorized. He said the board was launching a formal review, and they would be contacting the management company to discuss next steps. I felt a surge of relief, but I also felt anger. Christine had been running a shakedown operation for months, and no one had caught it until now. I wondered how many people had paid fines they did not owe, how many contractors had been scared off, how many projects had been canceled because Christine decided to flex her authority. I also wondered what her endgame was. Was it just power, or was there something else? That question was answered 2 days later when Aaron called me. He said he had been digging into the HOA financials, which were public record in Colorado, and he found something strange. The HOA had paid Precision Property Services over $40,000 in the past year for landscaping and code enforcement, but the line items were vague, and the invoices were not itemized. He said it looked like the HOA was paying for services that were never clearly defined, and there was no competitive bidding process. He also said Christine's name appeared on several approval forms, even though she was not on the finance committee. He said, "I think she is getting kickbacks. I do not have proof yet, but the pattern is there." I asked Aaron what I should do with that information. He said I should bring it to the board, but I should wait until I had more evidence. He said he would pull the last 3 years of financials and cross-reference the payments with the board meeting minutes. If there was a kickback scheme, it would show up as a pattern of approvals without proper votes or documentation. I told him to do it, and I would hold off on confronting Christine until we had everything lined up. A week later, Aaron sent me a PDF. It was a timeline of payments to Precision Property Services, matched against board meeting minutes. The pattern was clear. Every time Christine issued a violation notice that required vendor work, the HOA paid Precision within 30 days. And the amounts were always rounded to the nearest $500. There were no itemized invoices, no photos of completed work, and no resident complaints about the violations. Aaron had also found 3 canceled checks made out to Christine personally, labeled as reimbursement for HOA expenses. The checks were signed by the management company, but there was no documentation of what expenses she was being reimbursed for. I showed the timeline to Tom, and his face went pale. He said, "This is embezzlement. If Christine was approving payments to a vendor and getting kickbacks, that is fraud, and the HOA could be liable." I said I was not interested in suing the HOA. I just wanted Christine gone and the fines reversed. Tom said he would call an emergency board meeting and bring in the management company. He also said he would recommend the board hire a forensic accountant to audit the last 3 years of financials. I said that sounded like a good start. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. In the meantime, Miguel finished the fence. It looked great, clean and straight, and exactly where the permit said it should be. I took photos and sent them to Tom along with a final invoice from Miguel showing the project cost. Tom replied and said the board would reimburse me for any fines Christine had threatened, and they would issue a formal apology. I said I appreciated that, but I also wanted a written guarantee that Christine would not be involved in any future enforcement actions on my property. Tom said he could not promise that until the board voted, but he would recommend it. Monday night I went to the emergency meeting. The clubhouse was packed with residents, more than I had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Word had gotten out about Christine's shakedown operation, and people were angry. Tom opened the meeting and said the board had reviewed evidence of improper enforcement actions and questionable financial transactions involving the Welcome Committee chair. He said the board was suspending all pending violation notices pending a full audit, and they were recommending the management company terminate Christine's authority to issue citations. He also said the board had voted to hire a forensic accountant and to request a legal opinion on whether the HOA had grounds to recover funds paid to Precision Property Services. Christine was not there. Tom said she had resigned from the Welcome Committee the night before, effective immediately. The room erupted. People started shouting questions, asking if their fines would be refunded, asking if the vendor contracts would be reviewed, asking if Christine would face criminal charges. Tom held up his hands and said the board was committed to transparency, and they would share the audit results as soon as they were available. He said residents who had paid fines in the past year could submit a refund request with documentation, and the board would review each case individually. After the meeting, several residents came up to me and thanked me for pushing back. One woman said Christine had fined her for painting her front door the wrong shade of beige, even though the covenant did not specify paint colors. Another guy said Christine had threatened to tow his truck for parking in his own driveway, claiming it was a commercial vehicle even though it was a personal pickup. I realized Christine had been targeting anyone she thought would not fight back, and most people had just paid to avoid the hassle. 2 weeks later, the forensic accountant delivered a preliminary report. The findings were damning. Christine had approved over $60,000 in payments to Precision Property Services over 3 years, and less than half of that could be tied to documented work. The rest appeared to be inflated invoices for services that were either never performed or were wildly overpriced. The accountant also found that Christine had received 4 checks totaling $8,000, labeled as reimbursements, with no supporting receipts or board approval. The report concluded that there was probable cause to suspect fraud, and it recommended the HOA refer the matter to local law enforcement. Tom called me and said the board had voted to terminate the vendor relationship with Precision Property Services immediately, and they were filing a complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office. He also said the board had voted to issue me a formal apology and a written waiver of any fines related to the fence, along with a no-contact directive prohibiting Christine from any further involvement in my property. I said that was exactly what I wanted. A month later, I ran into Paul at the neighborhood coffee shop. He said the board had refunded his $300 mailbox fine, along with fines for 6 other residents. He also said Christine had moved out of the neighborhood. No one knew where she went, but her house was listed for sale and the listing agent said she was relocating out of state. Paul said, "Good riddance." I agreed. The final piece came 3 months later. The county inspector who had issued my fence permit called me and said he had heard about the HOA dispute. He said he wanted to clarify something for the record. He pulled up the permit file and showed me the setback requirements. According to county code, fences had to be at least 5 feet from any public right-of-way, but there was no setback requirement for private property lines unless the property was on a slope greater than 15%. My lot was flat, so the only rule that applied was the 5-foot right-of-way clearance, which I had met. He said if Christine had enforced her 3-foot rule, it would have violated county code, because it would have forced me to place the fence inside the required clearance zone. He said she was not just wrong, she was backwards. I laughed. It was the perfect capstone. Christine had spent weeks threatening me, fabricating evidence, tampering with survey stakes, and shaking down my contractor, all to enforce a rule that would have put me in violation of actual code. When I told Tom, he said, "That is unbelievable." I said, "That is Christine." The HOA audit was completed in the spring. The final report confirmed fraud and recommended the HOA pursue civil recovery against Christine and Precision Property Services. The board voted to file suit, and they hired an attorney to handle the case. I did not follow it closely, but I heard through Paul that Christine settled out of court for $20,000 and agreed to a permanent ban from any HOA leadership role in Colorado. Precision Property Services lost its contractor license after the state investigation found evidence of bid rigging and invoice fraud. As for me, my fence is still standing, my dog is safe, and my detailing business is back on track. I even picked up a few clients from the neighborhood after word got out that I had taken on Christine and won. Miguel finished 2 more projects in Harborview Terrace, and he said the new HOA management is reasonable and professional. The board replaced Christine with a retired teacher named Sharon, who runs the welcome committee like an actual welcome committee, greeting new residents with cookies instead of violation notices. I still have the folded policy sheet Christine shoved in my face that first day. I keep it in a drawer as a reminder. Not every fight is worth having, but some are. When someone decides they have the power to rewrite the rules and intimidate people into compliance, sometimes you have to call their bluff, document everything, and make them answer for it. I let her get the last word, because I wanted the last consequence. And when I finally dropped the invoice trail showing suspicious kickbacks to an HOA vendor in that calm 2-sentence statement, then let the silence do the damage, her smug smile vanished, and the room turned on her. The HOA canceled the vendor relationship tied to the abuse, and her bluff got read out loud and the room reacted exactly the way I hoped. I got my fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive, and Christine never bothered me again. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama and neighborhood justice. I hope you enjoyed the story.